Hello, hello, hello.
Hi.
Oh, we did it. We're back. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Look at this. I can't believe we're back. Let me see. I should turn off the heater. We're having just the absolutely craziest weather here in the Bay Area and in California in general. It was hailing, like little, ice a minute ago. And then it was raining, and now the sun is out.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know
Is there
what's
an
going-
echo or something?
Maybe. Oh, am I echoing? Here. Oh, wait. Oh, I know what it is. No, actually, I don't know what it is. Maybe I'll try these headsets. Whew. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. That's better now.
Okay. Much better. Very good. I'm so sorry about that. Oh, wow. Thank you for joining me. I know it is very late for you in France as well. Is there still an echo?
Josh, I think there is some echo. Yeah.
Okay, I wonder what it is. How about now?
That seems okay.
For
Like-
sure?
No. Yeah, you see there is like a doubling or something.
Do you have your, like, for me, my output and my input audio are the same. So what about you? Do you have speakers and headsets different?
No, everything is on my headset. I mean, I'm using my mic and my headset.
Oh, so you've got two different devices. Try just doing one.
No, no, it's the same.
Oh,
It's already the same one.
because I can hear myself on your audio as well. That's bizarre. I can actually hear myself.
It's already the same one.
I can hear myself on your audio as well. Where could it else? How bizarre. I hear a whining sound. How bizarre. I hear a whining sound.
I will try to rejoin. I don't think it's. Now I do get odd noises. Yeah, I think someone from the comments. Okay, I will leave and rejoin.
Okay, well, while he's doing that, can you all hear me okay? Like, yeah, I think I heard my voice on Mahmoud's side as well. And, hopefully it's not my side. I just did 2 streams right before this. One was with my headsets, one was with the studio display. But either way, it was one device, Let's see. Well, this is always the fun part about doing these things live is you got this weird audio visual issues. In the meantime, hi everybody, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. I know it's really late in some parts of the world where people are joining me. I've been doing live streams all morning. It's been so much fun. Hey Mahmoud. Oh, there you go. Mahmoud, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, hello.
Can you
Do
hear
you
me?
hear
I
me
can
now?
hear you. Yeah.
No. Oh, no, now it's okay. Awesome. I don't know
Oh,
what
good. Okay.
happened, but
Computers are
anyway,
dumb. So dumb.
sorry about that.
It's not your fault. It's the stupid computers. Uh,
Technology is great when it works as expected.
yeah. It's super bizarre. Quite interesting. Yeah. Simon has been enjoying. I've been on. This is my 3rd live stream of the day, and this is, they say save the best for last, and that's what we're doing
Thank you.
here, right? No, thank you. It's 11 o'clock here, so let me think. 9 hours ahead. 12 is 8 o'clock, 8:20, 8:12 for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Rodrigo Graciano says Mahmoud is great, and he
Oh,
helped
thank you.
him to build his DevNexus presentation. Thank you, Mahmoud.
You
I
are
remember.
welcome. Yeah,
I
thank
remember
you.
Rodrigo reached out to me, and I said you should talk to Mahmoud, and I think he was already talking to you, so that's good.
You are welcome. Always glad to help if I can, of course.
Of course,
Thank
and
you.
you always do. So.
I try my best. Thank you for having me. It's a
Oh,
pleasure
so
to be on your show. So thank you.
it's my pleasure. I've had you on the show before, right? You've been
Yeah,
on the show
exactly.
before, but just in case people missed that episode, which is shame on them, but just in case, how would you describe yourself? Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Mahmoud, and I work on Spring Batch at VMware. I joined Pivotal VMware 5 years ago now. Oh,
Wow.
yeah, already 5 years. You see, time flies when you enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I work mainly on Spring Batch and also other projects from the portfolio where Spring Batch is used. Basically, sometimes I contribute to Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, Dataflow.
Spring Cloud
I
Task.
Spring Cloud Task as well. Yeah. So wherever Spring Batch is used or related, I mean, I I I contribute there. And before that, before joining Pivotal VMware, I worked as a software engineer for many companies in different fields. And then, yeah, I joined Pivotal VMware to work on Spring Batch. And since then, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. So, yeah, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants.
Right.
And yeah, it's always great to work on an open source project and leading the effort to make things to move things forward. We have a great
Amazing.
community, and I try to help as much as possible the Spring community. And yeah,
Well, that's you've done an amazing job, and I've been asking you questions, and Rodrigo said he needs to catch up on the Spring Batch live streams that I've done recently. Always something to learn. I would say that those are okay. You know, those live streams. The good parts were thanks to Mahmoud and other people that I bothered for some help. The you also forgot. I think you were just being modest, but you also one of the reasons I appreciate you so much. One is because, well, you know, you live in one of my favorite countries, but second, also, you, even before you joined the official like Spring team, you were doing cool things in open source. So I remember Easy Batch and Easy Flow, and I love that stuff. I love that you love batch processing and workflow as much as you know, other people
as
and like me. You know.
yeah, indeed, I used to work on open source a lot in my spare time, and
Right.
I think we have a common background about data
Mm-hmm.
processing. I also come from that background, data processing, messaging, and so on. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I run a couple of open source projects on the side.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy that they are now used by some big companies. It's always rewarding to see your work used by companies like JetBrains,
Right.
Netflix, Splunk, and so on. But yeah, it's not. It's like some tools that I developed on my spare time. I never like spend professional time on this, but yeah, it's always great to see useful to develop useful tools for others.
Right.
Unfortunately, today I don't have a lot of time to work on them, but
Yeah.
they are still maintained. I mean, I try as much as I can to contribute to them. But yeah, it's not my priority today.
Which is fine, but they're still very useful already. I mean, they're, and I just love that you like. Okay, if I was going to do open source today, right, and I wanted to like become successful, uh, you know, I think creating a workflow engine would be the last thing I would do, right? Because it's just such a very specific use case. I love
Yeah,
workflow engines. I've even created some of them in my life, but it just seems like the group of people, the small group of people on the planet, they're like, oh, I need a workflow engine. It's such a very rare,
it's a
you know,
niche.
use
Yeah,
case. It's a niche. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, exactly. And yet you did it, and I love that for you. I love you for that. And I love that about you. You know, is that this you work on these things that are just like they speak to my way of thinking about building systems. You know.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, the use case of easy flows came from like a frustration from from BPMN and BPL and so
Right.
on. It's like 500 pages specification, and it was quite complex and intimidating to start with. And I said it doesn't have to be that complex. So let's try something
Exactly.
easy. 3 or 4 workflows like conditional flow, parallel flow, and iteration and so on, and you can compose them to create complex ones.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently it was quite successful. We can like create complex flows with this easy model, like domain model.
Yeah.
People are using it. I get a lot of emails, support questions, and so on, requests. Yeah, and it's interesting to expose yourself and your thinking to people. So this is maybe the mistake I have seen people doing, like having not having the courage to expose their code and probably
To
be
try it.
uh, yeah. So I said, look, the best way to learn is to really put it there, get criticized. Of course, you are not smarter than anyone else. I mean, you
Not
can
everyone,
always
certainly.
have, yeah, like you can always have great feedback, and this is exactly what happened. I got a lot of feedback. I learned a ton from these projects, and yeah,
And that's
that's the
good because
goal,
it
I think.
helps. It helps a lot with what you're doing today with the Spring too. So your
Exactly.
wisdom, yeah, carries forward.
Exactly. I mean,
Um,
the what I learned in working on these open source projects on the side, I mean, I learned a lot from them, more than I learned what I've been doing in enterprise. So
right,
this is like interacting with people and see how they think and improving things. I made a lot of mistakes and interesting mistakes, I hope, not blunders, but I think
right,
these paved the road for me to work on a serious open source project like Spring Batch. And
right.
yeah, that was very helpful to me, and today I'm happy and proud to have been exposed with these side projects and then learn from them. And yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's you're right. That's a good point. Working software is a team sport, right? So if you can build
Exactly.
in open source, you learn. I mean, look, I'm not saying that programming is easy. I'm just saying that successful software is not just about programming, right?
Exactly,
Uh,
yeah.
an an engineer, a valued engineer on a team today, a senior engineer, is not just someone who can write code and
Of
so
course.
open source. I mean, you know that, of course, but open source teaches you that, and it teaches you
Exactly.
how to be a part of a team and how to be humble because people are sometimes very rude. Um,
Absolutely. And this is the more I work on open source and software in general, the more I realize that soft skills are as important as technical skills, if not more important. So,
I
okay, you
agree.
code something, then you have to promote it, you need to maintain it, you need to communicate about it, how to make it useful, how to gather feedback from users, how to be humble indeed. And yeah, it's not only about code, but about like the life cycle of the product you are building.
I am quote tweeting you on that one because that is uh, beautiful. Well, I'm going to put it in the stream and just leave it there for the world to appreciate. Soft skills are sometimes as important, if not more important, than technical skills. I love that. Absolutely,
Thank,
100%.
th-
I
thank
mean,
you.
oh, good. So today, 5 years. I cannot believe it's been 5 years.
Yeah,
I think
indeed.
what I think we even had this conversation when you were on the show the last time, which was recently. It feels like, but of course, the pandemic dilates my sense of time. Um, when was
Tw-
the last
I
time you were on
think
the
it
show?
was 2022, 2020, maybe
Yeah,
2020.
2020, in December of 2020. So it's already been 2021, 2022. Now here we are in 2023. So 2+ years.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow. So it was already 3 years or so, right? When we talked last time on the show. That's amazing. Like time has sure flown by.
Indeed.
And now you just released Spring Batch 5. Is that
Hmm.
right? That feels right.
Exactly.
Um, Spring
501 yesterday.
yesterday, yeah. And that's a so I was just talking to Oleg Zhirkowski in the last live stream, half an hour ago, and I was I was kind of marveling at how not I mean old basically Spring integration is old. It's an old project. It's been around since 2007. Spring Batch has been around since 2006, right? It's 16, 19 years. Is that right? No, that's not right. 2020. What are we? 17 years? I
It's
don't know, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's 16 years ago indeed.
16 years ago. Long time for a single open source project.
Yeah.
And if you look at the very first version of Spring Batch, um, the concept of a tasklet was more important than it is today, and so the abstraction felt very different. But then since 2.0, right, you've had basically chunks, steps, item readers, writers, and processors, and it's basically the same interface, same abstraction, same
Since
interfaces
then,
since then. Yeah, and
yeah,
it's been unbroken, and it just continues to work. And
yeah,
uh, you
that
know,
proves the how robust the domain model of Spring Batch is and how well
yeah,
designed it is, I think.
exactly.
Uh, yeah,
And so you can change little things around the edges, but the core, if you saw it,
is almost the
there's
same.
yeah, the do you remember that diagram that the JBatch, it was from Spring Batch, but it got used by the JBatch initiative, the JBatch effort. And
Yeah,
I look at that diagram still. Here we are, 2023, 16 plus years later, and it still
the same.
works just fine. Yeah, exactly. Um, so, first of all, just for people who have never heard about this, what is Spring Batch, and why would I use it instead of just going home early, or something like what? I could do anything. I don't know.
Yes, so Spring Batch is a batch processing framework for the JVM. Um, it's to it's designed to process data in batch. So it's not like streaming, and this is something that people don't sometimes get confused about. Stream processing and batch processing are quite different. And Spring Batch is really targeted at batch processing for like data at rest, not live streams of data.
Right.
Spring Batch is the leading batch framework on the JVM. So there are some other tools, but I think Spring Batch is leading. Um, Spring Batch gives a structure for your batch application. It gives you this framework where you can design your batch job as a
Right.
collection of steps, and then you can, of course, design the flow as you need. It gives a lot of features, provides features like transaction management, fault tolerance, scalability options, observability, and so on. And I think it's a complete framework. It has everything you need to implement a modern batch architecture, I think.
Right.
In a
Okay. So
nutshell, I think, yeah, in a nutshell.
that's another great. It almost sounds like an oxymoron to me. An oxymoron is something that they're two words that sound like they're opposites of each other. What is a modern batch? Like a batch is old, right? Batch is decades, right? 50 plus years we've been talking. 60 plus years we've been talking about batch processing and mainframes, and
Magnetic
they're
tapes.
still. Yeah, exactly. That's batch processing, right?
Yeah.
What separates batch from just file IO, or why would I need when does it become a batch problem instead of a basic input and output problem?
Yeah, I think um, what you need when you need a solution like Spring Batch is when you have a lot of data. I think, of course, if you have to process a small set of data, you don't really need a framework for that. But as
Right.
soon as your data grows and you have a lot of data that doesn't fit in a single transaction or on a single machine or something like this, you have to introduce like a framework to help you deal with these amount of data. So,
Yeah.
like for example, imagine you are processing a large file or a large database table, and your processing is fails. I mean, your processing fails halfway. How you would do that? Will you lose all the processing you did before, or can you restart from where you left off? How can you
Right.
deal with not loading if you have a limited set of resources like memory or disk? You can't really load everything in memory, so to process it at one time, so you have to find a way to stream data chunk by chunk or something like this. So all of these constraints like are uh, makes it like makes you meaning you need to have a framework for this. You can do
Right.
this by yourself, but of course it's always difficult to re-implement everything. Those are recurring patterns that have been proven to, I mean, those are
Yeah,
recurring patterns that have been implemented, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think Spring Batch is a good fit for this kind of jobs.
I do too. And what I love about, you mentioned the framework, and I think the framework part is very important because a lot of times we think, okay, I want to do A, B, and C. I want to do this to the data, and then I want to do this, and then I want to do that, right? And it is very natural to start with just a method, and then you try and do A, B, and C, and you realize, okay, I've got a lot of data. Okay, so maybe I should put the data in some place so that it's, once I've done it successfully, once I've done A, it's saved somewhere. So that way, if
Exactly.
it fails between A and B, I can just start with B next time. Okay. But even within A, you have a lot of data. And so what if I get halfway through A and then it fails, or there's some improperly formatted data or whatever? In fact, even today, when we start with machine learning and this kind of stuff, and a huge thing they teach you is you can't work with data unless it's clean. So you have to, a lot of time, people who work with machine learning, a big part of the job is learning how to normalize and clean up data, right? To
Exactly.
get rid of, first of all, simple stuff like, okay, I've got too many commas or there's a unquoted data or whatever. That's the first part. And then second is, processing it.
The
Actually, I'm making
processing
sense of
itself.
it. Right. But that you can't do anything with the data unless it's clean. And a lot of times it's not. So sometimes you have to have robustness in the code on how to handle that. And that's
Exactly.
just, it just is the way the world works. Whether we want it to be or not, right? A lot of times you get a file created in one framework or technology or language, and it gets dropped in your lap, and you have to do the right thing with it every day. New file, new data every day.
Yeah. And the cool thing about Spring Batch is that it saves the execution context of your application in a persistent store. So if your application dies in
Yeah.
some way for some reason, you can restart it from where it left off. So this is the idea of restartability. And why I mentioned the modern batch application when a couple of minutes ago, because today we are deploying like batch workloads in the cloud, okay?
Mhm. Yeah.
And we know by nature cloud environments are like flaky. Sometimes nodes are gone, they are restarted, they are replaced, and so on. So what if my batch application is running on a node and then suddenly the node disappears and reappears elsewhere? So I
Right.
don't want to lose the processing I did just before. So Spring Batch, I think, is a good fit for this kind of environments because it persists the execution context of your application in a persistent store. So if the application dies, the metadata stays there. It's in a persistence store. So when you restart it, you can restart it on another node and it will pick up the same metadata and restart from where it left off. And this is very important, I think, to correctness. Before
Right.
talking about performance and scalability and so on, correctness. If I start a job to process this amount of data or this data set, am I sure to have the correct result even if my application dies in the middle?
Right. That's so
And
important. And
yeah, so
that
this
is
is really what I like about Spring Batch. If you don't have this feature, you will be forced to think about restartability yourself, and you have to design restartability in your algorithm, in your solution.
right.
And so with Spring Batch, you can say, okay, I can read from this file right to this table, and if something goes wrong in the middle, I can be sure that Spring Batch will handle that restartability for me. Imagine you don't have this feature, so you will have to imagine yourself a way. You have to find a solution to this problem. How can I restart from where I left off? So you will have to like implement some save checkpoints or save points, and then design your application to restart from that last save point and so on. But all of this is given for free when you use Spring Batch, and this is awesome, I think.
Well, you're right. And you have to design it. You have to do it correctly. And the worst part is, that if you have to do it at scale, you may not even realize until you've gotten a million records in that there's a bug, right? And it might be one of those things where you start processing tonight, come back tomorrow morning, and you find out, oh, 2 hours later it broke, right? So
Exactly.
I don't want
Yeah.
to. I don't want to build this, and I especially don't want to have to maintain it when the cycle time, the reset and cycle time, is hours or days or whatever. It can take a long time for these jobs. Um, uh, Yeah, like I don't. I want somebody else to do that for me. This is one of those things where
Where
reinventing it is costly, but it's so much more costly when you have mistakes, and you're gonna, right?
exactly. So this is the kind of features or a requirement where you need a batch framework for you. So it's also you need a library for this. If you're reading from a file or a table or some other data source, you don't really need to reinvent this reading or writing code. So Spring Batch comes with a rich library of readers and writers that you can use to read and write to different data sources. I don't really need to implement my own reader,
Right.
only under some specific situations where I need a custom item reader. But I think most of cases are covered: files, databases, message brokers, and so on. And Spring Batch has a large library for this, and it's growing. We have the community adding stuff,
I
and
love
this
it.
is awesome. Yeah,
Well, I so okay. The files I get, the CSV, yes, flat files, yeah, XML, all that makes perfect sense. Databases, SQL databases. When I knew Spring Batch was going to change my life, the moment I realized that this is not just your regular thing was when they introduced the batch message listener, right? Message container, whatever. When you could start doing messaging in
yeah,
batch, you could do like bulk reads from JMS or whatever.
yeah.
It,
Yeah, it's a nice feature. It's not a feature built in Spring Batch itself. I mean, we have a
yeah,
sample for that, and the batch listener, this one is not part of the standard library, so you don't get it when you download Spring Batch. But we have a sample that you can use, and you can copy the code from there. Yeah, and indeed, it's interesting because it allows you to have like a bridge between streaming and batch words. So you can like read from a message stream and then do
right.
some batch processing for it. Yeah, so this is a bridge between both words.
Yeah, I love that. And because you think about it, like it's really inefficient to do one message at a time. I would actually like to accumulate whatever a chunk of messages, and then process them and write them all in a chunk to the database. It's so natural when you think about it, right? I love event-driven architectures, but one by one, that seems like a waste of resources. I could just do a chunk. Um, uh, yeah, I love Spring. I love Spring Batch for that. So okay, good. So Spring Batch, big chunks of data. You want stages in your data processing so that you have lots of checkpoints. That's why you've got the step abstraction. So you can say, okay, I got to this point. I got to this point. What if I get an error? Okay, you said I can resume. Um, what are the criteria for resumability? Like I know that if I create a batch job, it has parameters, and these parameters help distinguish whether this job ran, today on Friday or on Saturday or whatever. But if I want to restart the job, what does that mean? How does it know to restart the one that I ran on Friday, for example?
Yeah, so for this, I mean, Spring Batch uses it has the concept of job instance, and this is basically a logical group of job executions. Um, so, for example, I will explain this with an example. Imagine you have to generate a report every day. Like you have an
Yeah,
e-commerce application, you want to a sales report every day. So, like Monday, you have a report. You have a report to generate for Monday, another report for Tuesday, and so on and so forth.
yeah,
Now, now you can say, I can provide the day of the report as a job parameter. So I can say, please generate a sales report for Monday.
right,
So this is the date, the current date is the job parameter. So when you run this batch job, it will like, for example, generate a file. And let's imagine it fails halfway. Now you are on
right,
Tuesday. You are on Tuesday.
right. Okay,
And you know that
on
the report of yesterday failed. So if you
right,
want to run the same report of yesterday, you can rerun it manually. Say, please generate the report for Monday. Spring Batch knows because it has this knowledge of the job parameter, and there is a way to identify things. It's basically a hash of the job parameters, and it knows that, oh, I have already tried to generate a report for Monday. So let me check in my database if there is an instance for this report and if there is like some processing have been done for this report. And this is what allows Spring Batch to know if you are requesting a fresh start or a restart of another. execution. So if you rerun your report on Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever for the same day that you have already
Right.
done, Spring Batch can know this, and it will, based on the metadata it saves in the database, say, okay, this is a restart. Let me check if there is some processing that has been done there.
Yeah.
So, and it can go and say, oh, okay, I generated like half the report. I need to generate the other half, and it will resume from where it left off. So this
Amazing.
is the idea of job instances, and a job instance can have multiple executions. So the first one fails, the second one can fail as well, and the third one maybe it succeeds.
Right.
And this is the idea. So you have an instance of a job, and then you can have one or multiple executions. Then what differentiate a job instance from another is the job parameters. So basically there are two types, identifying one and non-identifying one. So the identifying one are the ones who are used to identify a job instance. So basically if you have two
Right.
or three parameters, what Spring
You
Batch
only want
does
one as a
is,
key.
yeah, exactly. It will combine them as a key. It's an MD5 or SHA-1. It's configurable, but by default
Yeah.
it's MD5. And it gives a key, and this key is the discriminator between job instances. Yeah,
So I can
it's nicely designed. I think it's
vary.
but of course you can have non-identifying job parameters. Like for example, in the example I gave, the date could be an identifying job parameter. Maybe the format of the report can be non-identifying, like it could be CSV, XML, or JSON or something like this. So
Yeah.
it's the same report, but I can generate it in a different format. You see, so it doesn't really participate in the identification of the job instance itself. The discriminator is the date. I can have other
Right.
non-identifying job parameters, but yeah, this is just an example. So
Ah.
what's interesting about this, if I may,
Well.
is
Yeah.
that sometimes you don't want a job instance to be run twice. For
Right.
example, you have an input file that contains bank transactions. You want this file to
Yes.
be run only once. If you run it twice by error or by mistake or by any
Whatever.
for whatever, for some reason, you will have serious consequences on this. Okay, you will run the same transaction twice. It's not good. It's not. It's a problem. So what Spring Batch allows you to do is that if by error you try, like you have two processes running the same file at the same time, if you have a concurrent execution,
Which
Spring
happens a
Batch,
lot, by the way. You
which
start up
happens a lot,
a
by the way.
you
Exactly.
start up a
So
job instance and it acts. You kind of you talked about the cloud, right? Like
yeah,
it automatically does. Sometimes it'll just create two instances.
yeah, it happens
You've
all
got
the
to
time.
process.
So yeah, Spring Batch guarantees that only one of them will succeed, and this
Right.
is great, because if I have to do this manually, so I need to design like a locking mechanism or something like this. But with
Right.
the centralized job repository design, so when you create a job instance, there is a transaction going, and only one client can create a job instance or can execute a job instance at a time. So if by mistake two machines are like launched at the same time, they will launch the same job instance at the same time. Spring
Right.
Batch will like prevent one of them to run. Only one can run at the same time. This is one thing. The other thing is like rerunning the same thing again. So imagine only one process
Right.
launches the job. So we finish the processing of this file. So everything is good. But by error or by mistake, you rerun it afterwards, like today, like tomorrow or another day. By mistake, you rerun the same file, but you don't want this to happen. It's not a concurrent
Right.
execution. It's not a concurrent execution. It's like duplicate execution. This is a different problem. And of course, Spring Batch also by design does not allow this kind of problems to happen. So when a job instance completes, it's done. You cannot rerun it another time. And I think this is
Nice.
similar to, yeah, this is a very, a very interesting feature. People don't
Right.
realize this, but it's actually a lot of work to just implement these two features of preventing duplicate executions and concurrent executions. There are,
Right.
of course, there are solutions to this problem. logs, and so on. But you have them for free in Spring Batch, so you really correctly design your job instances. So choose the right parameter, that you don't have duplicate keys, and so on. And then you are like free from dealing with these concerns, which is awesome, I
I
think.
I think Spring Batch is, because people don't. Okay, think about this for a second. Most people don't kind of appreciate what we're talking about here. When you have a Spring app, Spring apps are most by default they're singletons, right? Spring Beans are singleton by default. You've got one of them per context, but Spring Batch is a little different. Spring Batch, you're meant to run the jobs multiple times, right? But you can parameterize them just like you can a web request, and just like with a web request, you can have beans that live only as long as that run exists, right? So a batch job that ran yesterday is a different invocation of a job, in the same way that a web request you make on a Spring MVC controller today is a different request than you made yesterday and might have different parameters. And so Spring Batch also has this step scope, right? So you can actually have beans that have access to data that is unique to this invocation of the job, to this run of this job, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and it's Spring Batch, and it's very kind of interesting. You can run the same job over and over and over. It doesn't exist just one time. So yeah, having the facility there to automatically lock yourself out of being able to run it the same job multiple times, so you don't create side effects, undue extra processing, like you mentioned bank transactions. It's so painfully obvious that you don't want to run the same bank transaction. You don't want to debit the same account twice, right? Just
Exactly.
once. Just once,
Yeah,
never more than once. Exactly.
exactly once. and and
Exactly
of
once.
and of course not concurrently. This is also because in a cloud environment, and this is also why I try to mention this, in a modern environment, in a cloud environment, this happens all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes at a large scale you can't even control this, and um, concurrent execution is something that you need to think about from the
Right.
beginning. Otherwise, it's about correctness. It's about really, we didn't even deal with scalability, performance, and so on. It's really to
Right.
have a correct input output of your batch job, and how it is deployed, and so on.
Well, I mean, even you mentioned cloud, and that is obviously it's relevant today. But even like in the old world, you'd have a batch job on a cron. You might have one every hour. The one that is supposed to process today's work ran an hour ago, but it's still running, right?
Yes.
Maybe it takes an hour and 20 minutes to run. So you don't want something that gets started an hour later when you're still not finished with the first one to start over, stepping on the feet of the one that's already running. So
Yeah, overlapping with the previous one. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's just so important to have that built-in safety. So, and at scale, no less. That's what what I'm trying to say is you want batch to protect you against problems that only become an issue when you have to do something for a long time. You deal with lots of data, with lots of concurrent actors, lots of all this stuff gets problematic when you start getting overlapping runs. Okay, so Spring Batch. I love Spring Batch. I did just mention cron. Spring Batch doesn't do scheduling, right? It does jobs. You start a job, and the job finishes. What part of the stack should I be using for
Scheduling.
scheduling? Yeah.
Yeah. So as you said, Spring Batch doesn't provide any feature to schedule job executions. So it provides a way to launch them. There is an abstraction for
Right.
that, job launcher and job operator, but there is no scheduling features in Spring Batch. And I think this is a good choice. There are many good tools there. So if you want to deal with scheduling, you have obviously the Spring capabilities, the add scheduled
Mm-hmm.
annotation, which
Mm-hmm.
gives you like
Quartz.
cron, Quartz as well. So I was about
Yeah.
to mention Quartz.
Sorry.
Yeah, there are
Job
many.
scheduler.
Exactly. There are also enterprise grade products like Control M and so on and so forth.
BMC.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But
Autosys.
Autosys, I think, yeah, Autosys as well. But yeah, as soon as you have your batch job defined in Spring Batch and a way to launch it, then you can schedule it with whatever tool you want. So
Right.
it's not an issue.
And of course, Kubernetes has a cron job, and we have Spring Cloud Data Flow, which you can use to orchestrate this
Yes.
stuff. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. Don't worry about that, but it's not in Spring Batch. Don't feel like you're left out. That's actually a feature, not a bug. Now, my friend, we talked about the basics of Spring Batch, and I love that we had this conversation because I think it's useful for a lot of people today. But
I
what I
hope.
really want to talk to you about, well, I think it is because I think a lot of people don't realize there's a whole domain, a whole class of systems and architecture and
Problems.
programming that deal with this. Somebody looks at this and they say, "Oh, I've got a large text file. I guess I'll write it myself." No, don't do that. Just like it's obvious to me if I have to build a web service, it's obvious to me at least, and to you and to anybody who's been programming for a little while, that you shouldn't write your own web server. That's insane. It's absolutely insane. You would never do that, right? You'd be fired probably, or at the very least, somebody would mentor you and hopefully teach you the error of your ways. In the same way, I cannot more effusively and emphatically stress that you shouldn't write your own batch processing code. It's a problem. Don't do it. It's maybe somebody
Sure.
didn't teach you, but you need to know.
And even if you do it, you are not sure that you have covered all the use cases. People, yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, when you have a batch solution that was there for 15 years, I mean, for sure there are problems you might not think about, and yeah, so it's always a last resort to try to develop something yourself, and
no, thank you.
yeah,
So okay, so now we've got Spring Batch. It's again, what did we say, 16 plus years old now? Very, very bulletproof code. It's been used by some of the largest organizations on the planet for decades. And I always like to joke that I would love to help people replace their COBOL and Kix mainframe solution with a very small Spring Batch app. That's to me that's very fun and very satisfying. But here we are. Spring Batch 5.0 just came out last November.
exactly.
Was it November?
Last
Right. So
November,
5.
yeah,
So
5.0.
already 4 months almost, or 3 months at least, but still recently. We have 5.01 that just came out yesterday.
Hmm.
What are some of the new features? Why should people upgrade to the new and latest and greatest?
Yeah, so I think it's been like a huge year for the Spring community. All projects from the portfolio basically released major versions, and Spring Batch is no different, of course. I think why people should upgrade to this version, I think it's a collective movement with the release of Java 17. I think now we have a new baseline for the entire portfolio, I guess, all major releases. Since we are following Spring Framework, which has a Java 17 as a baseline, Spring Batch as well has a Java 17
Right.
as a baseline. This is already
Nice.
a good argument, I think, because Java 17 is awesome, both in terms of features and runtime efficiency and so on. So this is the first thing you have to follow. At some point, you have to follow the uh, the ecosystem. Everyone
Of
is
course.
yeah. Um, we have a lot of features in Spring Batch 5. It's a huge release. I think we have been listening to users. There are many features that have been implemented that have been requested for many years, and I'm happy to see them finally released in Batch 5.
Right.
We are so busy in Spring Batch, and sometimes
Always.
yeah, it's having a major release is a good opportunity to because we can break things, we can introduce some breaking changes, and
Right.
of course for the good.
Of course.
Um, so what we have in Spring Batch 5 is, apart from the new baseline of Java 17,
Hmm.
is of course based on Spring Framework 6, Spring Data 3, Spring Integration 6, and so on. So we have upgraded to all these
Micrometer.
Micrometer 1.10, which is also a major release. So okay, talking about Micrometer, the observability support in Spring Batch has been improved in Batch 5. So we
Right.
have we have new metrics. We use the new APIs from Micrometer 1.10. We
Wow.
have tracing, batch tracing. This is a new feature, and I'm really excited
Wow.
about this thing. So batch tracing in very quickly is a feature that allows you to trace the execution of your batch job. It's different than metrics. So, for example, you want to have, if you are a bit familiar with tracing, I mean, the audience, you have this spans, you have these traces and spans. So imagine you have a dashboard on which you can select your batch job, and then you will see a trace with a span for each step if you want. So
Right.
this would be amazing because I can select the step, like for example, if one step takes too much time, I can select the step and see the details of the execution. So if my step like does a web request or a database request, I can trace exactly how much time has been spent in each part of the application. So tracing is different than metrics, and I think it's awesome because it allows you to pinpoint where your batch application is spending most of its time. And
So
we have like
the metrics might tell you that a high percentage of your jobs are taking normal time, but some are within this like extended duration. And then the tracing, you can see the details of those extended batch
exactly. So
jobs.
you can
Okay.
really see step by step, like call by call, and how much time has been spent. Of course, you have tags and so on, and it's very customizable. But this is really a feature I'm excited about because what can I mean in production sometimes your batch jobs take some time and you don't know, you have to check the logs and so on. With tracing you can have a dashboard and nearly in real time you can like check where your job is hanging or
Wow.
what. So this is something that we introduced in Spring Batch 5 thanks to
Do I have to
Micrometer
do
1.10.
do I have to do anything to enable that besides having the actuator on the class path?
So you have just to yeah, you have something to do. So basically it's one line of code if you will. So you have to configure a tracer and
Okay.
then add it to the observation registry. So this is basically all you have to do. So by default is disabled. There is a no op
Hmm.
implementation. But if, for example, if you Spring Boot, the tracer will be auto-configured for you. You just need to say, okay, I need to activate tracing, basically. There is a
Right.
default handler, and you add the tracer of your choice, of course, as long as it is supported by Micrometer.
Right.
Micrometer, it can be Brave, OpenTelemetry, or whatever. So and then you say, please activate tracing for me. It's literally one line of code, and you have tracing.
Nice. That's a
And
property, I think.
it can be a property or in a programmatic way. You add the
Right.
listener to the observation registry, and you are done.
Nice. That's so
Yeah,
cool. That's basically free. You just upgrade to Spring Batch and you get that. That's
yeah. So this is observability. We have been working on this to improve metrics and adding tracing. The other feature I'm really excited about is native support. This is this
yes.
is this is awesome. This is a game changer, I think. So we have been working with the Spring Native team and Spring Framework team to make it possible to natively compile Spring Batch applications as native executables. So,
Right.
there is all these native hints that you need to declare and so on. So we have been working to add these. Sometimes there are missing hints, but yeah, we are working on making sure that everything is covered. But the idea is that you have your batch application, you natively compile it, and then you have a binary that you can run, and
Right.
this binary is, so you might be wondering why I need to do this. It's of course for all the good stuff that native applications bring,
Right.
like almost instant startup time, runtime efficiency, what else? Memory consumption, reducing the memory usage of your app, and so on.
Right.
And we have some benchmarks for the same batch application that is run as a regular JVM app and
Yeah.
as a natively compiled app. And sometimes the speed up is like 10 times faster or 8 times. It depends on the use case. But the total execution time is is better in most cases. So this is, of course,
That's so cool.
if your app is running 10 times faster than your JVM version, it's if you translate this on your bill, on your cloud platform
Right.
bill, it will be something different. Of course,
Wow.
startup time is also improved, but I think
Yeah.
for startup time is not really useful for a batch application. If your batch app
Yes.
runs for 2 hours, it doesn't really matter if it starts in 1 second or half a second. It's the same thing.
Right.
But
What
the
I
total
love about
execution,
it,
yeah,
the
yeah, go ahead.
memory. I love the
Memory
memory.
usage is as well. Yeah, memory usage is less. I think it's you will use less resources, probably
Yeah.
less threads. So yeah, this is really awesome. It depends on the use case, of course. You have to do some benchmarks yourself. It depends on the app,
Of course.
but I think the overall result is awesome, and I think there have been there has been a lot of effort across the portfolio. Everyone has been working on native support, and it's a collective effort. And kudos to the Spring Native team, Spring Framework team for they they
Right.
they provide the basic building blocks for us to make sure our projects compile natively, and this is awesome.
It is awesome, and I've built a lot of batch. Believe it or not, I mean, because I use Spring Batch like a lot. I really, if I'm not building a web app, then I'm probably going to use Spring Integration and Spring Batch. Right? There's somewhere in my code where that will fit. And so I built a lot of apps. Heck, I just did a bunch of stuff, on stream, and except for some very specific like corner cases, Spring Batch just works. And when it doesn't work, there's an error that's very useful that tells me, okay, this type needs to be registered for reflection. And so it's not Spring Batch. That's just my code, and I need to fix that. That's fair. It's been great. Um, okay, great question here. Somebody says let me see. Hello. I want to know if it makes sense to run multiple instances of a job on different portions of a database. For example, I have 1 million rows to process. I launched 2 jobs of 500,000 each. What would you say to that, Mahmoud?
Yeah, so this is a typical use case. So there are different choices here. I think you can. It depends on how much resources you have. So, for example, you have 1 million rows in a database, and you want to speed up processing. So you can design a job to run, like you give it a range of records from 1 to 500, and 1,000, and the other one from 500,000 and 1 to 1 million. 2 jobs running concurrently, each one processing half of the table. This is one choice. So here, like the range is a job parameter to your job. You will have 2 job instances running in parallel, each one processing its own data set. What you can do as well is having a single job with a partitioned step, where the step will be um, the same step will be running 2 partitions at the same time in parallel as well. But here you have a single job with a partitioned step. On the other option, you have 2 jobs running in parallel, 2 job instances. So it depends.
Okay.
I think so for this case, maybe partitioning is good. You have a single job, and if it fails, you will like rerun the same job for the same table. And Spring Batch is smart enough to restart only the failed partition. So if a partition succeeds and the other one fails, it will only rerun the failed one. So this is also a nice feature in Spring Batch. But yeah, it depends on
Very
the
nice.
topology of your architecture. You can design both of these. Of course, there is also concurrent executions. It's not only about partitioning. You can have like a multi-threaded step where each thread you can run with multiple threads. You process the same data set. Yeah, there are many scalability options in Spring Batch, and yeah, it depends on the use case. So
I
yeah,
like that partitioning. The partitioning, in that case, you have one database containing the job state, but you set up a step that when it gets to that step, it basically launches another run somewhere else. There's a thing that will read only like 1/3 of the data or whatever. You can give it basically it can divide the range, You have to tell it how to divide the workload.
Exactly.
And then you can just create as many instances of that worker, of that partition worker, as you
As
need. But they'll just smartly pull down the data for
exactly,
you. You know?
and you can do it locally with multiple threads in the same
Right.
JVM, or remotely with different JVMs on different machines.
So cool.
The partitioning in Spring Batch is very nice because I think it's well designed, and there are abstractions that allow you to customize the thing. So, but there are basically two main concepts: the partitioner and the partition handler. The partitioner is the piece that understands the data, knows how to partition it and create partitions. And the partition handler is what will handle the partitions. So basically, it will run each partition wherever and then gather the results. So it's like a fork join pattern here. So you have basically two concepts, and you can implement them. It's one method here and one method there, and
Right.
basically you can plug your custom implementation in Spring Batch, and it should work as designed. I can think about like I don't know, Docker-based partition handler. Each partition will run
Right.
in a Docker or a Lambda on a cloud platform or something like this. So yeah, there are many ways to implement this. Spring Batch, of course, provides
Right.
two or three partition handlers, I think. Task executor to partition handler to run partitions in the same JVM with multiple threads. I think there is a message channel partition handler. This
With
is
Spring
like
messaging.
with Spring integration, yeah, with Spring
Yeah.
messaging and integration. And there is a deployer partition handler. This is part of Spring Cloud Task, if I think. And this one allows you to run your partitions on different Spring Cloud Task apps. So
That's
remotely.
awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome indeed.
And we had Glenn Renfro, and he was talking about Spring Cloud Task on the show.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't know, yesterday or the day before. So if you want to learn more about that, people, I hope you'll go watch that episode. So okay, yeah, great question. That was a whole discussion in the interview I wanted to get to, but I didn't even look. It was just a great question. So okay, let's get back to the new features though, because we didn't even get close to covering all of them. Not even close. So that's the problem. You created too much good stuff.
Yeah, indeed. So it's also a teamwork. So
Well, yeah,
it's also the lovely community around the project. So we have
I love
the
it.
Java 17 baseline. We have the observability features, metrics
Yep.
and tracing. We talked about native support,
Right.
which is awesome.
What?
Another great feature is, yeah,
Hi, a question from me. What's this
sure.
system command tasklet?
System command tasklet. System command tasklet is a tasklet that allows you to run a system command on the platform you are running on. So, like for example,
Oh,
you have your
shelling
batch.
out.
Sorry.
You can shell
Yeah,
out to
exactly.
the.
You can shell out, yeah, indeed. So you can like I don't know, WC minus L to know the number of lines in your file and
Right.
take this information and use it somewhere else in your job. So system command tasklet allows you to run system commands basically in your batch application, in your Spring Batch app. We introduced a lot of new features for this in this implementation. So basically, we have a new interface, which is the command runner, I think, that decouples the execution of the tasklet itself from the command that you run on the machine.
Oh.
So
Oh.
so before that, it was like just the execute method, and there you type in the command you want, and it's like tied to the execution of the tasklet itself. Now you have
Right.
this decoupling. You have a new interface, a command runner. You can implement it in whatever you want for whatever platform you want. Because sometimes the command you want to run is like not portable and it's specific to
Right.
some OS and so on. With this new interface, it decouples the execution of the command from the tasklet itself. So you can like mock it in testing, you can implement it in different ways and so on. So this was a contribution by the community. I told you it's not only me, but
Of course.
this is a lovely feature. And since it was a bit breaking, we
Waited
delayed
for the
it
big one.
to batch 5. Yeah. Another feature is the enhanced support for Java records. So I love records.
Me too, so much.
Yeah. So we introduced record support in batch 4.3, I think, or even 4.2. So at the time, I think records were like in preview. They weren't finalized yet. So
Yeah,
they were finalized in Java 16. So we tried to introduce like initial support for them with reflection hacks. So trying to get the canonical constructor and try to pass in the component in the right order and so on. So you could use records with Spring Batch 4.3, but we didn't have the access to the Java Lang record API. So it was
I
not like
see.
it was not available to us as framework developers. So when we started working on batch 5, which is based on Java 17, we have this API Java Lang record, so we can improve record support and implement it correctly. So we have this API, we can check if a type is a record or a regular class and so on. And so we improved a lot of things. So like we introduced new field extractor, I think. We
Nice.
improved our builders to detect your type if it is a record or a regular class. So you don't have to worry. Like if I have a person class
Yeah,
and I use like a flat file item reader and I say my target type is person dot class. Okay.
right.
So in previous versions, I had to know if person is a class or a record, of course, and like I need to register the right field extractor for it. Okay, so I need to know myself if my type is a class or a record to know what I need to how to map it basically to an instance of my class or my record. So with batch 5, you don't have to do that. So you say, here is my file, here's my target type, and Spring Batch can detect if the target type is a record or a class, and it will automatically register the component for you if it's a mapper or field extractor and so on. So
Wow.
this is nice because as a user it's transparent to me. I don't care. Here is my target
Right.
type. If it's a class, it's correctly configured. If it's a record, it will be correctly configured as well. I don't need to think about these. Yeah, so this is nice. And I see someone saying in the comment, better record support is lovely. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
um, exactly.
There you go. Sorry about that. I forgot to highlight that. Yeah, it's so nice. Because it Spring Batch is there's a lot of when you deal with large amounts of data, there's a lot of moving parts. At least with Spring Batch, it's a well understood. Like you understand that you have to have a step and you have to have these item readers and writers, and you need to build them, right? And so what I want is for the code related to defining the pipeline to be as small as possible, and then I want the code related to my data to be as small as possible, so I can see the big picture instead of being drowned out by all these getters and setters and constructors and all this
Yeah,
nonsense that hides the picture of what's happening. The big
yeah.
picture.
Maybe one thing which is great with records and why I really love this feature is think about it. Imagine, so in production, usually you have a lot of fields in your input data. So your data structure on the Java side is also following the same structure basically. So you have the same number of fields. Okay. So
Right.
when we provide in Spring Batch, when we provide a record field set mapper and a record field extractor, these things know by reflection how to map each field from the CSV file to your type. Okay. Now
Right.
here is the thing. Imagine you have your custom implementation of a record mapper of like bean wrapper or something. So you literally implement the interface and you create a new instance of your object and then you set field by field. Okay. Imagine one day the business people add one or two fields in your CSV file. What do you have to do? You have to go to your class, add these two
Oy.
fields, and then update your implementation to map these two fields, right? So you have to change the code for that. With these two, like the record field set mapper and record field extractor, you don't have to do this. So they automatically know the fields, and now you just
Right.
need to change the definition
Record.
of your record, and then they will
Yeah.
like add the constructors and map the fields and so on. So it's less work than before. than having a class that you implement and you need to add the getter, setter, feeds, and so on. So this is,
I
for maintainability, is nice, I think. And
huge.
this is also thanks to the Java records, which is added in Java 16. And of course, we have it since we are based on Java 17.
Right. I love it. Another thing, I'm another thing that we talked about with Glenn, and I didn't know about this because it's just hard to keep up with everything. One thing that I learned thanks to Glenn, apparently you can just support any object now for a job parameter.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah, indeed. This is another area where we had to break things.
that's
So if you
okay.
know, that's okay for a major version. So for batch 4, we had 4 supported types for Java for job parameters: string,
Right.
date, double, and long. So this is like a restrictive list, and
Yeah.
we have seen a lot of users, myself included, doing some hacks to like support booleans, or so you had to convert like true false to a boolean parameter. Or if I have another date type, like let's say Java time local date, it's not supported, you have to use Java util date, which is we
Right.
know it's not the right design and so on. But yeah,
Right.
what if I want to use my customer as a job parameter? So I have to like
Right.
to this is the goal. I mean, I want to use any type of my domain as a parameter. Like in the example I gave earlier, I said we have an e-commerce application. I want like to generate a sales report for a given customer.
Right.
How can I do that? I want to pass my customer as a job parameter. So with batch 5, you can like say, okay, java-jar, my batch.jar, and customer equals, and I can give a string representation of my customer. So all you have to
Wow.
do is to tell Spring Batch how to go from this Spring representation to a Java object. So basically, you will have to register a converter, which is nothing more than a converter from Spring Framework. So we use the
Right.
default conversion service from Spring Framework. We didn't create any new
Right.
APIs or
Well.
interfaces. We just plugged the Spring's conversion service into the batch framework. So you
Right.
have to tell Spring Batch how to convert string literals to objects and vice versa. And that's it. And now you can use any type. So it's customer, person, not only these 4 types, which is a restrictive list, I think. No more hacks. You just
No
need
more
to
hacks.
you just need
I
to
mean
register a converter and you're done.
I was telling Glenn the other day. I've done this hack where I created a JSON version of something
Oh yeah.
and then sent that as a string parameter, and then I
Okay.
unmarshalled it in the job. But I injected the job parameter as a string, or I got it as a string, and then I
Yeah.
manually used Jackson to serialize it back into an object that was useful to me. I've done that like a lot, like
I've done that as well. So
even
now you just need to tell Spring Batch what is a string representation of my job parameter and back, so back and forth, and it will use the Spring conversion service.
conversion service,
Yeah, and
and that probably the conversion service. I think it understands things like Java IO file, right? Like it has Boolean, it has dates, it has
yeah,
a
exactly.
lot of stuff.
It's
So you know,
by default is already smart. I think it covers a lot
yeah,
of types, and you can add your custom ones as well. So
yeah.
it's yeah,
That's so cool. It's
yeah.
it's a does it was I not able to use Spring Batch before? No, of course not. It was great. I could use it before, no problem. But this is just a few lines of code that I don't have to write and nobody else has to understand. Nobody else has
Yeah.
to parse. It's just very nice.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
what else do we have?
related to that, because it's related to this job parameter thing, is the
Yep.
notation of how to specify job parameters. This also has changed. We had to change it because you need a way to pass the information from the command line arc to your batch framework and say, how do I
Right.
interpret this value? So it's basically key value pairs. So it's as usual key value pairs, but the interpretation of the value is different now.
Right.
So for example, why we did this, and probably this is a good opportunity to explain this. So in Spring Batch 4, we had like this, the way to specify if the parameter is identifying or not was done with like the dash, minus or plus sign just before the job parameter name. You see, like if I
Right.
say plus
You mean
schedule date.
if you're doing a Java minus jar, my job.jar, and I want to
Hmm.
specify a parameter that gets passed in as a property, you're saying I would do
Yeah,
plus or minus. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
This plus or minus is problematic, especially with Spring Boot when we use like double dashes. You see,
Right.
when you remove these, you take out also the dash that has a meaning for Spring Batch. So the job parameter, which was like meant to be non-identifying, is now identifying because we remove this minus sign. You see, so this is
Right.
problematic. So we said, how can we introduce a new notation that is not problematic in this case? And the idea was like to have a specific interpretation of the value that allows us to do this. So we need a way to specify the value of the
Wow.
parameter itself as a string literal. We need a way to specify the type, the fully qualified name, and another way to specify if it's identifying or not, which is a Boolean. So the most common and natural way was like a comma separated value, like you have the
Right.
string literal, the comma, the fully qualified name of the type, comma, and then true or false. We can make this smarter, of course, in a later version, but this is
Right.
the basic idea.
Sure.
And then, of course, you can like convert parameters from string literals to typed values and vice versa.
So I could say dash that. I can use Spring Boot notation now.
You can, yeah, and it doesn't
Okay.
interfere with the Spring Batch notation.
So I can use
So
dash dash schedule dot date equals 2020 whatever dash 12 dash 12 comma Java time local date.
exactly, comma, true or
And
false. Yeah.
is the comma true or false optional?
Yeah, it's optional. Yeah, indeed. So
Okay.
this level of details, I didn't want to talk about it, but of course, we can imagine some defaults here. The job parameters are identifying by default, so the last
Right.
parameter, true or false, can be omitted. If the parameter is not specified, we assume that it is a string because it's the most used job parameter type. So at least
Right.
you have the key value pair. I think with Spring Boot, you don't really need this dash dash. It's key value pairs, and it's okay.
Okay.
You have all the information needed in the value, so you don't really need this dash dash thing from Spring Boot. It's key value pairs, key equal value, with a specific
Okay.
interpretation of the value, and that's it.
Oh, so the keys and values here are being processed by Spring Batch, not
Exactly. Yeah.
Spring. So okay, because Spring Boot has this property source that reads from the command line. And to be honest with you, I always get confused. Is it dash dash or dash D or whatever? I just use dash
Yeah.
dash. But for Spring Batch, this is not required. Cool. That's
Yeah.
even better. I like that.
Yeah. Name equal foo is a perfect job parameter there.
Perfect. There is you've also greatly improved. I don't have to inject job builder factories and step builder factories anymore. I can use constructors. I can just call job builder, passing in the repository, and I'm fine now. I like that a lot.
Yeah, so there is a huge amount of work that has been done on the configuration side of Spring Batch, and I think
Right.
this V5 was the right opportunity to do it because it was a bit confusing in V4, and many people were asking how to simplify this. And the way we did that is trying to be as consistent as other projects in the portfolio as possible. So
Right.
the major changes in this area are the way you configure Spring Batch through the enable batch processing annotation.
Right.
And the second thing is we introduced a new class, a new base class that you can extend to configure Spring Batch. So in V4, if you remember, we had to implement an interface called Batch Configurer. So
Right.
this basically was the way to customize Spring Batch. The problem is that you have to add an annotation and also implement an interface to customize the behavior of the annotation. And this is like, so it's a
Too
declarative
much.
way. Yeah, it's a declarative. When I use an annotation as a user, I want to be as declarative as possible. Enable batch
Right.
processing. I want to use this data source, this transaction manager, this job repository, for example, declaratively. I don't want to go programmatic and implement an interface. So we said, okay, probably this batch configurer is not needed at all. It's an indirection that we don't need. How about adding attributes in the annotation itself? And
Much
if you
better.
see, yeah, see other projects from the portfolio, you have this thing. So in Spring Data
Right.
and so on. So we said, okay, enable batch processing. Let's add a data source attribute, and I can point to the data source I want to use, like my in my job repository implementation. I want to use this transaction manager. It's also an annotation of the an attribute of the annotation, and so on. So I don't have to implement an
Serializers and
interface.
everything too.
Serializer, table prefix, the encoding, and so on. So now it's much more straightforward, I think. You add the annotation, you customize it with attributes. You don't have to implement an interface. So
Wow.
this is the declarative way, and the programmatic way is not by implementing an interface, by extending a default batch configuration class, which contains the basic infrastructure beans, job repository, launcher, and so on. Of course, if you want to customize things, you just override the method. This is
Right.
the programmatic way. I don't need an annotation here. I want to go programmatic. I want to extend things. I want to have complete control. I can override the method, have some conditions there on how to create things, and so on.
Right.
So these are the two ways, which were
That's
mixed,
amazing.
which were a bit mixed in Spring Batch 4. So to your point about Job Builder Factory and State Builder Factory.
Hmm.
So if you see why we did this, the idea is that when you see the added value of these two factories, builder factories. So here
Right.
to create a job, you have a builder and then a factory. So you have a factory that creates a builder, and the builder creates a job. So also we said let's see what's the added value of the job builder factory. And if you see, it's only setting the job repository on the job. So it's only this, and probably we don't need a concept for that. So
Right.
if I want to build a job, I have the job builder API. What do I need? At least I need the name and the job repository to which the job will be reporting. So
Right.
I don't have like to make the annotation, inject this builder factory in my application context, and
Ugh.
then inject this in my bean definition
No, no.
method, and then use the factory to create a builder, and then use the builder to build the job. You see
Right.
how many you see? So we said, okay, let's make it simple.
Just
You have the job builder API, the user, and
right.
even in terms of lines of code, if you do the comparison, it's almost the same thing. So I think it's more intuitive now.
It,
Yeah, so there are some changes to do if you migrate your app from batch 4 to batch 5, and we have like some code examples in the migration guide. This should be straightforward.
yeah, I love it. I love it. And we're just to round out our review here, because again, there's not enough time to cover everything. But when you talk about moving to Java 17, there's also Jakarta EE9,
Yeah.
which is, you got Hibernate 6, which now uses that. So that's a new opportunity for people. There's also, what else is there? My goodness, there's so much other stuff here.
Yeah.
To better testing support.
Yeah, better testing support. We have introduced like so there are two things here. Testing support in Spring Batch is via an annotation and also some APIs that allows you to facilitate
Right.
how to test things. So in Batch 4 we had some issues on how to set up test facilities, like when you add the not enable Spring Batch test annotation, things were auto configured in your test context, and they were not working well together. So we tried to remove the auto wiring of test utilities in the batch in the test context, so that your setup is more intuitive and
Right.
not not mm, I mean, we try to reduce as much magic there as possible. So, for example, if you have multiple jobs in your test context, in Spring Batch 4, you had to specify which job to is under test,
Apply
and
to.
sometimes it doesn't work well. So now, if there is one job, we will auto wire it in the test. Otherwise, we will tell you, please tell us which job you want to test. So these kind of niceties we improved in the testing support. We also migrated all our test suites to JUnit
Wow.
5, which is awesome. This also was a contribution by a community member. So
Really?
thank you for that. Yeah, so I'm really thankful and grateful to all these persons, these
That's a
forces.
huge job too. That's a
It's
lot of work.
amazing. It's amazing, and
Wow.
I really appreciate the effort there.
Oh,
So yeah,
that's
this is
amazing.
also thank you for this person. I mean, this is also for contributors. So if you want to contribute a feature or a bug fix or something, when you will write the
Right.
test, you will use JUnit 5. So you have all the nice assertions, features, and so on. So it's not only for us, but for the contributors as well.
Yeah. Wow, that's so cool. Wow,
Yeah.
I had no idea. We're so lucky. Best community
We
ever.
also use a Docker-based integration tests. Batch
Right.
is using a lot of databases. So in the past, I mean, it was before Docker and so on, it was difficult to test things against a specific database. You had to install the database on your local machine and run the test and see how it behaves and so on. Now with test containers, which is awesome, and Docker-based tests and so on, we
Right.
improve the way we test our samples, like not the samples, but at least we have integration tests for our support for all the databases we support with Docker. I mean, in a Docker container. So we also plan to update our samples to use Docker. So yeah, this is also part of the test improvements we have done.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to. I mean, it's incredible. Another thing that people may not realize is that now I mean, this is like small stuff. This is, unless you are paying attention to this, you won't even know. All of the documentation, which is again 16 years old, has been moved to ASCII Doctor, like the Spring ASCII Doctor backend. Right? That's huge.
Yeah.
I'm just big. I love this. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
There's so much cool stuff here.
Exactly, and also the idea is to make Spring Batch as consistent with the other projects from the portfolio as possible. So you see, in terms of APIs, in terms of documentation, the way annotations work and so on, so that people, when they move around from project to another project in the portfolio, they feel at home. It's the same consistent style, consistent documentation, and so on, which is really awesome in the Spring world. So yeah.
So cool. Amazing. My friend, you're amazing. I can reach you. I can talk to you, and you always help. But I think other people would love to be able to talk to you. Are you on the internet? And if so, where can people find you? And if you want to be found, first of all, but if you do, where can people find you on the internet?
Yes. So I'm on GitHub, of course. I think from the batch page you can find me. I use the same handle. I try to use the same handle in many different places as possible. It's FM Ben Hassine. This is my
Okay.
I will. And I think the easiest way to reach out to me is on Twitter. My DMs are open. On GitHub as well, or send me an email. And usually I'm not too much on social media, but yeah, if someone wants to reach out to me, I'm open. I would be happy to help.
Okay, wonderful. I appreciate you taking the time to join me today, my friend. It's been a true privilege and pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
so
you
much for everything.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure always. And I hope people will enjoy Spring Batch 5 as much as we did in developing it.
Oh, good. I should have said, maybe I should have said, je te remercie d'être venu. Thank you.
Merci
so
à
much.
toi de m'avoir invité. Thank you very much. Okay.
Bye, everybody.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.